February 1944. Night grips the North Atlantic with a cold that cuts through steel. A Royal Navy frigate, one of the newer escorts, modified for anti-submarine work, rolls heavily in black water. Spray lashes the bridge windows. Visibility is near zero. Somewhere out there, beneath the surface, a German U-boat hunts the convoy strung out behind her. In the cramped sonar compartment, lit only by a dim red lamp, a young operator leans towards his headphones. He sits utterly still, save for one finger tracing the steady pulse of the ASDIC transmission across the console. Each ping returns a faint echo, deeper now, shifting slightly to port. He notes the bearing. The contact is holding. Unlike earlier in the war, the ship no longer has to lose sonar at close range. The new fan beam system tracks the target all the way in. Above, on the bridge, the captain studies the plotting table. No dramatic orders, just a quiet nod. The weapon settings are slaved directly to sonar data. Within seconds, the Squid mortars will fire without visual confirmation. A heartbeat of silence, then the decision. To understand how this moment became possible, we must go back to the beginning of the Atlantic struggle. The struggle beneath the Atlantic did not begin in 1944, nor in the convoys of the Second World War. Its origins lay a generation earlier, in the cold depths off Britain's shores during the First World War. By 1917, German U-boats were sinking merchant ships at a rate that threatened Britain's survival. The Admiralty, pressed to respond, formed the Board of Invention and Research, a call to scientists and engineers to devise practical means of countering the undersea threat. One response came in the form of experimental underwater acoustics. In 1918, physicist Professor Albert Beaumont Wood, working with Canadian engineer F.H. Taylor, developed what became known as ASDIC, an acronym derived from Anti-Submarine Division, and, indirectly, a reference to the French submarine detection. The system used a piezoelectric transducer to emit sound pulses underwater, then listen for echoes reflecting off a submarine's hull. It was crude by later standards, but it worked, at least in trials. When the armistice came in November 1918, ASDIC had not yet entered service. Nonetheless, the Admiralty believed it held the key to future anti-submarine warfare. During the 1920s and 1930s, development continued quietly at establishments such as Fairlie in Scotland, the Admiralty Research Laboratory at Teddington, and what later became the National Physical Laboratory. The Royal Navy began fitting ASDIC sets to warships. By 1939, most escorts carried the equipment. Many senior officers were optimistically convinced that the submarine had been rendered strategically impotent. One post-war analysis noted that some interwar naval planners believed ASDIC had defeated the U-boat before the war had even begun. It was a dangerous illusion. When war broke out on the 3rd of September, 1939, Germany immediately ordered unrestricted submarine warfare in designated zones. British shipping losses rose sharply. Convoys were reintroduced, a tactic proven effective in 1917 but long resisted by admirals who favored aggressive patrolling. Early escorts, largely composed of aging V and W-class destroyers and hastily constructed Flower-class corvettes, carried ASDIC sets such as Type 123. These could detect a submarine at distances up to 1,500 yards under ideal conditions, but they suffered severe limitations: loss of contact when the ship maneuvered for attack, minimal depth estimation capability, and a vast blind zone immediately ahead of the bow at short range. By early 1940, merchant losses were mounting. Britain stood almost alone. France had fallen. The Low Countries were occupied. The evacuation of Dunkirk had saved men, not material. Churchill later wrote that the only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. But ASDIC remained the primary tool for finding submerged enemies, and it was not yet equal to the reality of combat. Training at sea further exposed the system's limits. In poor weather, pings distorted. Thermoclines, layers of varying temperature and salinity, bent acoustic waves, creating false echoes or masking submarines entirely. Once depth charges exploded, swirling debris disrupted detection for minutes. Escort commanders often found themselves attacking their last known position rather than a live, tracked target. Yet in Whitehall and Admiralty planning rooms, many still believed the system fundamentally sound. The loss rates of 1940 to 41 began to challenge that confidence. Experienced captains reported that ASDIC was reliable only under controlled conditions, not in the chaos of battle. This growing discrepancy between expectation and outcome marked the beginning of a quiet scientific crisis. The technology existed, but its tactical employment lagged behind submarines' aggressive approach. German U-boats, led by Admiral Karl Donitz, operated increasingly in packs, striking at night on the surface, exploiting radar limitations, then diving to avoid ASDIC when counterattacked. The Royal Navy held the right concept: detect, pursue, and destroy a submerged enemy, but lacked the precision tools to do so conclusively. The ocean demonstrated, with calm indifference, that sound alone would not win the war unless someone reimagined how it could be used. By mid-1941, the Battle of the Atlantic had entered its grimmest phase. German U-boats, operating in well-coordinated wolf packs directed by Donitz from occupied France, began striking convoys with increasing confidence. Using encrypted radio transmissions, later intercepted and deciphered at Bletchley Park, they converge on targets in the mid-Atlantic far beyond the range of land-based RAF Coastal Command aircraft. This deadly zone, known to the Admiralty simply as the Gap, became a burial ground of merchant fleets and escort vessels alike. The scale of loss was stark. In 1942 alone, more than 1,600 Allied merchant ships were sunk. Some convoy battles lasted days, fought in relentless seas, often in darkness. Early ASDIC-equipped escorts could detect submarines submerged, but U-boats typically attacked from the surface, where ASDIC was ineffective, then dived rapidly to evade retaliation. Compounding this, existing sets often lost contact during the final approach to the attack run, leaving the ship blind during the crucial moments before releasing depth charges. Depth charges themselves were largely imprecise. Dropped behind the ship, rolled from rails or thrown from K-guns, they relied primarily on estimated target depth and delayed detonation. A skilled escort commander could execute a well-judged barrage, but the margin for error remained significant. Even under ideal attack patterns, a challenging assumption at night in force 8 winds, the probability of destroying a submarine was often estimated at below 10%. The weakness lay not only in weaponry, but in sensory comprehension. ASDIC produced a narrow cone ahead of the ship, typically 15 to 20 degrees wide. As range closed, the contact slipped beneath that cone, forcing the operator to transition between horizontal and vertical listening modes. Ocean swell, thermoclines, interference from other ships, and the acoustic shadow created by the escort's hull all contributed to contact loss. German crews took skillful advantage of these vulnerabilities, executing high-risk evasive maneuvers that frequently succeeded. Recognizing this, some commanders adapted tactics. Most notable was Captain Frederick John Walker, Royal Navy, whose creeping attack involved a secondary ship maintaining silent ASDIC track while the attacking vessel approached at slow speed to avoid acoustic disruption. This improved chances of successful engagement, but demanded exceptionally well-trained crews and near-perfect coordination, neither of which could be relied upon in every convoy defense. By late 1942, pressure mounted on the Admiralty to confront the growing technical limitations. Reports from sea noted that while ASDIC was invaluable during the approach phase, It failed exactly when certainty was most required. Some described it as a handrail in darkness, useful for guidance, but not enough to reach the door. There was increasing acknowledgement that sonar alone could find, but not decisively kill. It was around this time that greater scientific effort began to shift from mere detection to integrated attack systems. At establishments such as WWII in Asia, the Admiralty Research Laboratory, and the Anti-Submarine Experimental Establishment, engineers and physicists, many reservist officers, some civilians, began pushing beyond the assumed boundaries of ASDIC technology. Most radical among them were those who proposed continuous contact sonar. Rather than losing feedback during the attack maneuver, these innovators sought to maintain tracking right up to, and even through, the weapon release. The ambitions seemed, at first, almost fanciful. Traditional naval thinking held that machinery could assist judgment, but should not replace it. Yet the situation, particularly in 1942, demanded more than incremental improvement. Simultaneously, new intelligence capabilities were maturing. HFIDF, high-frequency direction finding, nicknamed HFDUF, began locating U-boat transmissions with increasing success. Long-range Liberator aircraft extended air cover. Enigma decrypts allowed convoys to avoid known patrol lines. Still, when a submarine slipped underwater, the burden returned to ASDIC, and ASDIC alone. As the situation worsened, the need for a reliable underwater kill solution became undeniable. Some in the Admiralty turned to weapons, others, more quietly, to the refinement of sonar precision. Among the latter emerged a small number of British engineers willing to pursue what some commanders privately called mad ideas. It was these ideas, evolving in drafty huts, sketched across plotting tables, tested off Scottish coasts, that would soon change the war at sea. To see how that transformation unfolded, we must examine the individuals and the innovations that reshaped underwater warfare. WWII, on Scotland's west coast, looked unremarkable from the outside. A row of aging huts near the shoreline, battered by Atlantic winds. Yet within them, during 1942-43, some of the most critical engineering work of the war was underway. Among the scientists, there was B.S. Smith, a reserved civilian engineer whose proposals were initially met with cautious skepticism. Smith was convinced that traditional ASDIC failed not due to lack of power, but because of its geometry. A narrow beam pointed ahead of the ship could detect, but not hold contact during the final approach. He proposed a broader, horizontal fan beam, Type 147, supported by a Q attachment that could stabilize and track targets through evasive maneuvers. More radical still was his insistence that sonar data should directly control weapon settings. No reliance on estimated depth. No delay between detection and strike. The fuse depth of the Squid mortar charges, he argued, should be automatically determined mere moments before firing, calculated from the most recent echo. Many officers considered this too clever by half. At sea, instinct was trusted, machines calculated. But wartime necessity often favored clarity over comfort. Smith continued his work, supported quietly by Admiralty research divisions and engineers who recognized that precise technological intervention might succeed where thousand depth charges could not. His mad idea would soon be fitted to ships entering the North Atlantic. And for those listening on the headphones, the change was profound. Below deck, behind a watertight door, sat the sonar operator, often just 19 or 20 years old. His world was a dim compartment, lit by red to preserve night vision. A headset weighed on his ears. The rhythm of the ASDIC ping became the pulse of his watch. He learned to interpret minute fluctuations in the returning echo, tone, strength, timing. Each detail offered a clue to bearing, speed, and, with the new sets, depth. Hours passed like minutes or minutes like hours, depending on the contact. Seasickness, fatigue, the constant vibration of the escort beneath him. These were his battlefield conditions. Outside, Atlantic waves rose like walls. Inside, the only certainty was the faint echo of metal moving silently through water. The new fan beam, when introduced, altered his mental geometry. Rather than losing the U-boat beneath the bow, he could track it continuously. For the first time, the operator could sense that their contact was alive all the way to attack. He was no longer a guide handing off a blind estimate. He was part of the strike itself. He seldom knew the engineer's name who designed the system. He knew only that the echoes had become clearer, more stable, and that, somewhere above, the captain trusted the pings enough to fire without visual confirmation. The moment between last echo and Squid detonation could feel like an eternity. Inside a German U-boat, conditions were harsher still. Air grew stale within hours. Engines rumbled through the hull. The men lived in narrow compartments, often sharing bunks between shifts. When ASDIC pings were first detected externally, many U-boat officers dismissed them as trivial. Sound from surface vessels, no threat. That confidence did not last. As the war progressed, especially from late 1943, escorts began holding contact with alarming persistence. The familiar tactic, dive deep, change course sharply, remain silent, no longer guaranteed escape. Some skippers employed null maneuvers, rapid zigzag dives intended to break sonar lock. Others deployed acoustic decoys, including the bold canister, releasing bubbles to confuse tracking. Yet increasingly, the Allied sonar stayed with them. Survivors reported hearing the rhythmic hammer of ASDIC moments before an attack. The sound grew louder during the final approach, indicating continued tracking. In some instances, sailors described the unsettling precision of the strike, depth charges detonating exactly at the boat's operating level, suggesting a new form of targeting. Veterans later referred to this as the moment the British learned to see underwater. For many U-boat crews, it marked the shift from hunted to hunted. What had changed was not only Allied persistence, but their ability to translate echo into immediate action. Early in the war, standard procedure against a submerged contact was aggressive. Drive directly over the estimated position at speed and release depth charges. It was dramatic, often violent, but rarely precise. Contact was typically lost just before impact. The ocean absorbed miscalculation without mercy. In 1941-42, Captain Frederick Johnny Walker, Royal Navy, revolutionized the approach. He developed the creeping attack, a method requiring two escorts working in tandem. One ship maintained ASDIC contact at slow speed, relaying positional data, while the other advanced silently, engines nearly idle, to drop charges directly over the target. It required discipline, new perfect coordination, and careful timing, but its success rate far exceeded traditional patterns. Walker's methods were initially viewed as unconventional, yet results at sea forced recognition. His approach anticipated the principles behind sonar-guided weapons that followed. When Fairley's engineers later introduced integrated systems, Type 147 sonar slave to Squid mortar, they effectively mechanized Walker's innovation. Instead of relying on verbal relay and manual calculation, the system performed real-time adjustments based on the target's depth and position. The attack could be executed faster, often with lethal precision. What began as tactical ingenuity became technological doctrine. Quietly, the ocean turned less forgiving for the submarine. Sonar alone did not win the Atlantic. It was part of a broader asymmetric advantage, an intelligence chain unmatched by the enemy. The process often began long before contact at sea. A U-boat transmitted a brief status signal to headquarters. HFRDF, high-frequency direction finding, installed across escort vessels and coastal stations, triangulated the source, sometimes within minutes. Bletchley Park, decrypting Enigma traffic, helped convoys adjust routes to avoid known patrol zones. In some cases, direction finding even positioned escorts ahead of U-boats before an attack began. Once a submarine was sighted, visually, by radar or aircraft patrol, it would dive. At that moment, sonar took over. Underwater, only ASDIC could maintain the track. The new systems, especially once integrated with Q attachments and fire control, provided a continuous read. The late effect was dramatic. Intelligence exposed the U-boat. Aircraft forced it beneath the surface. Sonar held it trapped. Weapons destroyed it. It was an orchestration, not of luck, but of calculated interception. In that sense, Fairley's work was the final link in a chain that began at an intelligence desk and ended beneath 200 feet of water. German commanders began to speak of an enemy that could listen through the sea itself. The innovations that altered undersea warfare were not produced solely in naval establishments. They arose from an unlikely collaboration spanning shipyards, universities, and research institutions, often under wartime urgency. Factories working under blackout conditions manufactured transducers, electronic valves, and sonar domes with remarkable precision. Engineering firms in Lancashire and the Midlands retooled production lines originally meant for civilian equipment. Universities, notably Manchester, Liverpool, and Imperial College, contributed laboratory knowledge and mathematical modeling, aiding in acoustic calculations and wave propagation analysis. At the Admiralty Research Laboratory in Teddington and the Fairlie Experimental Station in Asia, physicists and marine engineers worked alongside naval officers seconded from the fleet. These officers provided frontline insight and operational feedback. Civilian scientists supplied theoretical understanding. The friction between the two cultures, practical seamanship versus experimental method, was undeniable. Yet necessity forced unity. This integration reflected a wider British wartime pattern, understated collaboration between military command and scientific inquiry. As one report later observed, the war at sea was won not by explosive power alone, but by the exactitude with which science allowed it to be applied. By 1943, the pieces were in place. Convoy escorts were now guided by refined sonar, supported by integrated intelligence, and armed with weapons designed to strike at precisely the moment of confirmed contact. The stage was set for confrontation and for transformation. The decisive transformation of Allied anti-submarine warfare began not at sea, but in controlled trials along the Firth of Clyde and the Scottish coast. By late 1942 into early 1943, Fairlie Experimental Station was deeply engaged in evolving ASDIC beyond detection. The principal question was clear. How could a submarine be continuously tracked at close range, even during the attack maneuver? Existing systems, particularly Type 144, lost contact during the final moments before weapon release. The solution required a sensor capable of holding the target within a broader, more stable acoustic field. The answer came in the form of Type 147 ASDIC, equipped with a horizontal fan beam, effectively spreading the detection arc, allowing the operator to maintain echo reflection as the escort advanced. Its Q attachment further stabilized the signal, compensating for evasive maneuvers and directing depth estimation in real time. The innovation, however, lay not merely in detection, but in integration. Fairlie engineers, led by B.S. Smith and supported by technical teams from Admiralty Research Laboratory, proposed coupling sonar data directly to weapon control systems. Specifically, the Squid mortar, a three-barreled, a head-throwing anti-submarine weapon introduced to replace depth charges. where depth charges were launched aft and required the ship to overrun the target, thus losing sonar contact. Squid projected charges forward. Each bomb, weighing around 390 pounds, could be set to detonate at predefined depths. Smith's concept involved timing the sonar ping, calculating the depth of the target just seconds before firing, and automatically programming the weapons to strike the submarine's precise underwater position. This was unprecedented at sea. Weapon settings were no longer based on delayed estimation, but on live acoustic tracking. During tests, the system was fitted to experimental vessels, among them the modified escort trawler HMS Ambuscade. Throughout 1943, sea trials were conducted under varied environmental conditions, differing thermocline structures, high swell, and close-range maneuvering. Reports from these tests, now archived in technical volumes and wartime documentation, indicated initial reliability issues, largely mechanical, but confirmed that when properly calibrated, the system maintained continuous sonar contact to within seconds of impact. The Royal Navy, conscious of rising U-boat success, authorized accelerated refinement. Senior officers divided in opinion, some regarding the setup as too mechanically dependent, a mathematician's instrument, unsuited to the sea. Others saw its potential to shift the balance. The first operational deployment of a complete Type 147 Squid integration occurred in late 1943 aboard select new-build River-class frigates. Known for their improved sonar platforms and stability in rough seas, these ships proved ideal for experimental systems. By early 1944, escorts equipped with a MAD sonar began entering the Atlantic theater. The system demanded exact procedures, low-speed approach, steady course alignment, continuous contact monitoring. Notably, it required confidence. A captain needed to trust waves on a screen and calculations within a few seconds, over instinct and conventional gunnery judgment. That trust came gradually, until operational experience proved its merit. One field report noted, "We engaged the contact at 600 feet range with Squid. Weapon settings were determined from the last echo. Detonation followed under 3 seconds later. Ore rose to the surface shortly thereafter. Contact was considered destroyed." The detail was understated, typically British. What it described was groundbreaking. It marked the first time in naval history a submerged submarine had been attacked using a weapon timed to detonate based solely on real-time sonar reflection. This was the true turning point, when the sea itself, once allied to the submarine, became acoustically transparent to the escort. To witness how this unfolded in combat, we now step into the North Atlantic, where theory met the unforgiving test of war. North Atlantic, spring 1944. Convoy ONS-234, outbound from Liverpool to Halifax, spans 38 merchant ships and 7 escorts. Among them is a recently commissioned River-class frigate, fitted with a new Type 147 sonar system and Squid mortars. Her captain, a quiet officer with Arctic convoy experience, has trained his crew in the new procedures, though many on board still view the system with reserve caution. At 2:17 hours, in moderate swell under overcast skies, a sonar operator reports famed contact, bearing 086 degrees relative, range 1,400 yards, depth estimate increasing. A U-boat, likely approaching for a surface night attack, has just dived, a tactic intended to escape radar detection. The escort comes to a low-speed bearing, matching the submarine's presumed course. The new fan beam maintains the contact. As the range closes below 800 yards, no transition loss is observed. The Q attachment stabilizes the echo. The operator relays data calmly to the plotting officer. No urgency beyond that of precision. No visual reference. No hydrophone estimates. Only sound. Measured, calculated, projected. At 600 yards, depth estimated at 190 feet, the ship shifts to attack phase. With traditional depth charges, the escort would now accelerate over the target and drop off, losing sonar for crucial seconds. Instead, Squid is prepared. The live depth reading is transferred to firing control. The ordering officer watches the timer align with sonar interval. The bridging moment lasts less than 2 seconds. Standby. At 2:19, Squid fires a 3-round pattern approximately 250 yards ahead of the ship. The charges arc through the darkness and vanish into the black Atlantic. No one speaks. 7.5 seconds later, 3 underwater detonations register through the hull. A moment of silence follows. Then a column of air and oil begins to rise across the bow wash. The sonar operator no longer hears the echo. The contact is not regained. This engagement typifies a shift occurring throughout 1944 to 45. Escorts equipped with advanced sonar sets and Squid achieved markedly higher kill probabilities than depth-charge-only vessels. In some analyses, probability of U-boat destruction per detected engagement rose from an estimated 7 to 10% in 1942 to above 25% in late 1944 among well-trained sonar Squid platforms. Ships such as HMS Spey, a modified river-class frigate, became emblematic of this new capability. In 2 engagements over consecutive days in 1944, she destroyed 2 German U-boats using Type 147 controlled Squid attacks, each initiated within minutes of obtaining sonar contact. Post-action reports indicated weapon setting was confirmed from last echo at ranges under 500 yards. The tactical consequence was profound. The U-boat, once shielded by the ocean's opacity, could now be held in continuous acoustic contact to the moment of destruction. Survivors' diaries reveal growing anxiety among crews. The British do not guess. They listen. And when they hear us, they strike soon after. Extract from interrogation summary. Kriegsmarine prisoner, 1944. By mid-1943, improvements in intelligence, notably Enigma decrypts and HF/RDF detection, long-range air cover, and refined escort tactics had begun to turn the tide. However, the full technological superiority manifested only once sonar and weapons became directly integrated. It transformed engagement from approximate to precise. With real-time depth correction, acoustic tracking uninterrupted by maneuver, and in a head-launch platform, the submarine's primary defense, invisibility beneath water, eroded. Warfare beneath the Atlantic progressed from reactive to predictive. In Admiralty proceedings after the war, one technical assessment summarized the impact quietly. Squid, mated to Type 147, provided the first underwater weapon delivery system based upon live positional data rather than anticipatory estimate. This materially affected anti-submarine success rates. A reserved conclusion. Yet it described a decisive change in undersea warfare. The ocean had not become less deep, nor the enemy less determined. But British science had made the unseen target visible, and the fleeting opportunity actionable. The transformation initiated in 1943 to 44 did not bring an immediate end to the U-boat war. German crews continued to fight with determination, and Atlantic convoys still sailed under risk. But from the moment sonar-guided weapons entered operational service, the momentum shifted. Through the first quarter of 1943, Allied merchant losses were severe. In May alone, 41 ships were sunk. Yet by July 1943, as new defensive methods and improved equipment infiltrated convoy escorts, loss rates fell sharply. From autumn 1943 to the war's end, U-boat sinkings increased, while merchant losses declined by over 60% compared to the preceding winter. While multiple elements contributed, intelligence, air cover, escort density, improved radar, The introduction of precisely coordinated sonar-to-weapon systems significantly increased the lethality of individual engagements. Operational data compiled post-war by the Admiralty Anti-Submarine Division indicated that ships equipped with Type 147 ASDIC and Squid achieved confirmed submarine destructions at a rate more than 3 times higher than conventional depth charge attacks conducted without continuous sonar tracking. Some reports from 1944 cite kill probabilities over 25% per encounter where contact was held through the attack phase, a substantial improvement over pre-1943 figures, historically assessed at 5 to 10%. The Royal Canadian Navy, heavily engaged in the Western Atlantic, rapidly incorporated the new technology into its escort fleet, particularly among River-class and Loch-class frigates. These vessels, with improved stability for sonar operations, became among the most effective submarine hunters of the campaign. Canadian frigates conducted numerous successful Squid attacks in 1944–45, reflecting the growing Commonwealth maritime contribution. Beyond operational statistics, the change was perceptible to those involved. Escort crews began to express, not confidence, but cautious belief that the tactical advantage was now in their favor. Captains increasingly trusted sonar output over instinct. Operators understood their role with greater clarity. The echo they traced was no longer merely detection. It was the pathway to decisive action. In informal correspondence between flotilla commanders and Admiralty officers, observations emerged of a subtle psychological reversal. One report noted, "The men no longer feel they are chasing shadows beneath the sea. They feel they are hunting with sight." This was not triumphalism. Losses still occurred. Ships were still torpedoed. In some cases, late-war U-boat designs surfaced under snorkel, presenting new hazards. But the overall trajectory was altered. By early 1945, the Kriegsmarine acknowledged that its U-boat campaign was unsustainable. According to captured documentation, the Admiralty's improved sonar and forward-firing weapons ranked alongside air patrols and special intelligence as primary reasons for operational withdrawal. The war at sea had been won not by force alone, but by properly directed precision. As one debriefing officer wrote in June 1945, "This was a technological victory conducted in darkness and silence, fought by those who could hear what others could not." When the guns fell silent in May 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic had lasted 5 years, 8 months, and 5 days. It was the longest continuous campaign of the war. At its heart lay a technological contest against distance, weather, and the opacity of the ocean. In the final analysis, the Allies' ability to pair intelligence with precision anti-submarine warfare proved decisive. Following Germany's surrender, Admiralty teams began a systematic examination of wartime anti-submarine technologies. This work, undertaken across 1945–48, involved assessment of equipment, tactical reports, and debriefings from returned convoy escorts. One conclusion, delivered with characteristically understated phrasing, noted, "The integration of continuous echo tracking apparatus with controlled projectile release represented a significant advance in anti-submarine combat effectiveness." Admiralty Technical Review, 1947. It referred, without ceremony, to the Type 147 sonar and Squid system. The technical evolution initiated at Fairlie informed post-war designs. A. B. Wood's acoustic research, begun prior to 1918, was extended into the Cold War era. His work on transducers and signal propagation now underpins sonar systems used by NATO naval forces in the 1950s and 60s. Wood was awarded the Thomas Eggleston Medal in 1946, and the Royal Navy's Acoustic Research Medal was eventually named in his honor. Fairlie Experimental Station's wartime huts were dismantled soon after the war, Their legacy absorbed into the Admiralty signal and radar establishment and later the Admiralty underwater weapons establishment. The work continued, albeit with different adversaries and new oceans. The conceptual leap that scientific measurement could guide weapon use directly became foundational in anti-submarine doctrine. Active sonar transitioned from detection only to fire control guidance. Later systems, including digital fire processing and integrated ASW suites, trace their lineage to the trials conducted off Scotland during 1943–44. In historical writing, the contribution of scientific establishments was often overshadowed by convoy battles and surface engagements. Yet naval historians increasingly recognize the importance of what was achieved in laboratories and testing ranges. As one researcher from the Naval Historical Branch observed in 1962, the battle was not won solely by those in uniform, but by those who lent their calculations to the sea. The broader cultural legacy was subtle but enduring. Britain's wartime scientific approach, pragmatic, quietly persistent, reflected national characteristics. Engineering precision was matched to operational necessity. Heroism was rarely loud. It manifested instead in rigor, and in the trust placed in a machine that could think faster than a human officer in the final seconds of engagement. By the 1970s, sonar-controlled projectile weapons had become standard fleet equipment. Training manuals cited Atlantic operations of 1944–45 as foundational case studies. The engineers whose proposals were once considered mad were now referenced as innovators. B.S. Smith, whose work at Fairlie proved instrumental, received no wartime public recognition. His contributions were acknowledged in classified files, and later in technical monographs on anti-submarine progression. He died in relative obscurity, yet his ideas live on in every naval vessel that trusts sound before instinct. An archived internal Admiralty note from 1951 describes his impact in a single line. Smith demonstrated that the ocean need not conceal, only that one must learn how to listen. The immediate battle had been won, but the echo of those wartime experiments continued long after surrender. In the end, the Battle of the Atlantic was not decided by force alone, nor by any singular act of courage. It was shaped quietly, by endurance, by observation, and by the determination to refine understanding of an unseen enemy. Among the convoys and storms, sailors learned that silence could be deadly, but sound could be a lifeline. Young operators listening through steel bulkheads. Scientists working in drafty huts, tracing wave patterns on paper. Commanders making decisions in darkness, trusting a flicker on a display rather than the instinct that had guided them through earlier seas. Each played a part in turning calculation into protection. British innovation in the Atlantic reflected the nation itself, measured, deliberate, outwardly restrained yet inwardly resolute. Engineers did not describe their work as visionary, only necessary. Sailors did not speak of victory, only of duty survived. The true triumph lay not in dramatic moments, but in countless acts of quiet professionalism. It is fitting, perhaps, that much of this effort remained uncelebrated at the time. The ocean offers no applause. Its surface shows nothing of what occurred beneath. Yet within naval records, archived reports, and the recollections of those who listened to the pings in the night, the story endures. A submarine was once shielded by darkness and depth. Through patience and precision, Britain learned how to listen through the water, and in doing so, changed the course of the war. When the headphones were lifted and the sea fell silent again, nothing marked the moment. No flare, no overt sign of success. Only the steady continuation of the convoy, heading west across the Atlantic, its safety carried in the faint echo of sound. A reminder that in war, as in life, the decisive change is often heard long before it is seen.